My sister forced me to walk with my attacker at her wedding. 3 years after my sister defended my attacker, he struck again, at her own wedding. In front of 180 guests, the facade of her perfect life didn't just crack, it violently shattered, leaving behind a wreckage of shame, regret, and broken trust. Now, she's divorced in therapy and drowning in a sea of guilt, while I am finally at peace. I've been with my partner, Luca, for 6 years. He's the kind of man who feels less like a choice and more like an inevitability, a steady anchor in the often turbulent waters of my life. He's woven himself into the fabric of my family, becoming an indispensable presence at every holiday, birthday, and Sunday dinner. He's the one who helps my dad with projects around the house, the one who taught my youngest brother, Nico, how to drive a stick shift, the one my mother fusses over with second helpings of her famous lasagna. He isn't just my partner, he's a son and a brother to them. Or so I thought. My sister, Sophie, has been with her fiancé, Liam, for 3 years. Their relationship has always felt accelerated.
Rushed.
Sophie is the kind of girl who has been planning her wedding since she was 6, meticulously cutting pictures of dresses and flowers out of magazines. The identity of the groom felt almost incidental. It was the wedding itself, the status of being a wife, that she craved with a desperate, all-consuming hunger. It didn't truly matter who proposed, only that someone did, allowing her to finally step into the role she felt she was born to play. Her desperation led her to ignore red flags the size of parade floats. The first of these flags was hoisted at the very beginning of their relationship when she duped me into a double date. She'd pitched it as a casual dinner, just the two of us and a buddy of Liam's. I arrived to find not a buddy, but Liam's older brother, Adrian. The setup was immediately, uncomfortably obvious. For the entire evening, Adrian was relentless. He made a series of unwanted, slick advances, his eyes lingering on me in a way that made my skin crawl. I told him, politely but firmly, that I had a long-term partner and was very much in love, hoping to erect a clear boundary. The information didn't deter him. If anything, it seemed to amuse him, as if my commitment was a quaint little challenge. The real horror began when I excused myself to use the restroom. The hallway was dimly lit, and as I pushed open the heavy wooden door, I felt a presence behind me. It was Adrian.
He had followed me.
Before I could process what was happening, he had me cornered against the sink, his hands attempting to find their way to my waist. A primal fear, cold and sharp, shot through me. I shoved him away, my voice a harsh whisper, telling him to back off before I locked myself in a stall, my heart hammering against my ribs until I heard his footsteps retreat. When I returned to the table, shaken and nauseous, I immediately told Sophie what had happened. She didn't look at me with concern or sisterly outrage. Instead, her face tightened with annoyance. She glanced at Liam, then at Adrian, and then back at me, a dismissive wave of her hand ending the conversation before it began. "You must have misunderstood him, Elena," she'd said, her voice laced with an unspoken accusation. "Adrian's just a flirt. You're being dramatic." She sided with him, with a man she'd known for a few weeks over her own sister. That night, a tiny, hairline fracture formed in the foundation of our relationship. Over the next 3 years, that fracture deepened with every forced family interaction. At their engagement party, Luca, ever perceptive, noticed Adrian's unblinking stare fixed on me from across the room. "That guy hasn't taken his eyes off you all night," he murmured, his hand finding mine. "Let's stick together." We spent the rest of the evening navigating the party like a minefield, constantly putting people or furniture between myself and Adrian. Every time I was near him, he would make some strange, inappropriate comment, always just quiet enough that only I could hear. Sophie wanted me, my twin brother Julian, and our 2 younger brothers, Nico and Sam, to be in her wedding party. The wedding was scheduled for mid-June, a grand affair at a country club she couldn't afford but was determined to have. A month before the date, she called me, bubbling with excitement about the final details. And then she dropped the bomb. "Oh, and by the way, you'll be walking down the aisle with Adrian." The line went silent. I was sure I had misheard. "What did you say?" "You're walking with Adrian," she repeated, her tone breezy. Liam insisted. "All the groomsmen need to be paired with the bridesmaid." "Sophie," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You know how uncomfortable he makes me. You know he touched me. I assumed I would be walking with Julian or Nico." "Don't be difficult, Elena," she sighed, the familiar sound of her annoyance grating on my nerves. "Liam really wants it this way, and I want to make him happy. It's my wedding day." It was a strange, specific thing for her fiancé to insist upon, and a cold dread washed over me. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculated move, a power play orchestrated by the 2 brothers. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. My other siblings were equally disturbed. Julian called her immediately, his voice tight with anger, telling her how inappropriate the arrangement was. Nico pointed out how creepy Adrian had always been towards me. Sophie became agitated, defensive, and fell back on her trump card. It's my wedding, and I will do whatever I want. A few days later, we had a family dinner at my mother's house. The air was thick with unspoken tension. I saw this as my last chance to reason with her, this time with our parents as witnesses. I carefully avoided mentioning the assault from 3 years ago. I had already told Sophie, and I had hinted at it to my parents, but their discomfort was so palpable that they'd quickly changed the subject. They didn't want to know. So, I focused purely on the aisle situation. The moment I brought it up, Sophie's face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she accused me of trying to ruin her wedding, of being jealous, of making everything about me. The performance was so sudden and dramatic that everyone at the table was stunned into silence. He just makes me and Luca incredibly uncomfortable, I tried to explain, my voice barely a whisper. That's when she delivered the final blow. Fine, she shrieked, her voice shrill. If you're going to be like this, then Luca can't come to the wedding anymore. If you bring him, you're not a bridesmaid. She offered no rational explanation. My siblings erupted in protest. Luca was family. He had been a constant in all our lives for 6 years, far longer than her own fiancé. But Sophie was resolute, her arms crossed, her face a mask of stubborn indignation. My 20-year-old brother Nico's girlfriend of 6 months, Emily, was still invited. My partner of 6 years was not. The injustice of it was staggering. Luca, bless his soul, was more hurt for me than for himself. I want you to go, Elena, he told me later that night. It's your sister's wedding. You'll regret it if you don't. But how could I go? How could I stand up there, smiling for pictures, while the man I loved was banned, all because I refused to be put in a compromising position with a man who had assaulted me? My family was no help. They were caught in the crossfire, paralyzed by a desire to keep the peace at any cost. After that disastrous dinner, Julian pulled me aside, his face etched with worry. This is ridiculous, Elena, he said, his hands gripping my shoulders. The way Sophie exploded, something is seriously wrong here. In the kitchen, my mother was clanging dishes with purposeful force, her preferred method of avoiding conflict. My father had already retreated to his study, mumbling about emails. Nico kicked at a dining room chair, his young face contorted with anger. So my girlfriend Emily is still invited, but Luca can't come? Luca, who's practically been our brother for 6 years. I'm calling Sophie out on this. He pulled out his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. Seconds later, it buzzed with her reply. She says it's different because you're not in the wedding party, he said, slamming his phone down on the table. Like that makes a single ounce of sense. You didn't see her face, I told Julian, my voice cracking. She looked at me like I was her enemy. All I said was that Adrian, the creep who followed me into a bathroom, makes me uncomfortable. My mother finally emerged from the kitchen, a dish towel twisted in her hands. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Maybe you should just do what your sister asks, Elena. It's just for one day. One day. Julian whirled on her, his voice incredulous. Are you serious, Mom? You want her to just suck it up and walk with the guy who assaulted her? I just don't want to see this family torn apart, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the floor. The family is already being torn apart, Nico shouted, by Sophie and her insane, selfish demands.
My phone rang.
It was Luca. I stepped out onto the back porch, desperate for the calm reassurance of his voice. She banned you from the wedding, I told him, the words tasting like poison. There was a long silence. Because you didn't want to walk with that guy? He finally asked. Because I dared to say so in front of our mother. Elena, he said, his voice soft but firm. You have spent your entire life trying to be the peacemaker in your family. Maybe it's time you chose yourself. Over the next few days, the situation escalated. Sophie, it turned out, had launched a full-scale smear campaign against me. My phone was inundated with texts from aunts, uncles, and cousins, all expressing their profound disappointment in my selfishness. My Aunt Carol sent a message that read, Your sister only gets one wedding day. Can't you put your personal feelings aside for a few hours? My cousin chimed in, I heard you're causing drama about the processional. That's pretty petty, Elena. Each message was a fresh stab of betrayal. Sophie was painting me as a jealous monster, determined to sabotage her happiness. It was a narrative so twisted, so far from the truth, that it made me feel like I was losing my mind. The boys, my brothers, were my only allies. Nico, through his girlfriend Emily, did some digging. Emily's cousin had gone to college with Adrian. She says he had a reputation, Nico told me, his eyes dark. A reputation for being handsy at parties. For not taking no for an answer. My stomach churned. There's more, he continued. Emily heard that Adrian has been telling people that you and he have a history. He's making it sound like you two had a fling. I felt the blood drain from my face. He wasn't just a creep. He was a manipulator. He was laying the groundwork, creating a false narrative to discredit me, to make any future complaints on my part seem like the actions of a scorned lover. Julian and Nico tried to confront Sophie with this information. She refused to even open her door, speaking to them through the security chain. Adrian already told me about the history thing, she'd shouted through the crack. He said you led him on during that double date, and now you're embarrassed about it. I was trapped in a nightmare of her making. My mother called, her voice strained. Elena, you need to apologize to your sister. This has gone too far. Apologize for what? I demanded, putting her on speakerphone for my brothers to hear. For not wanting to walk with the man who assaulted me? Don't be so dramatic, she sighed. Your sister said it was a misunderstanding.
Mom.
He followed me into a restaurant bathroom and put his hands on me. That is not a misunderstanding. There was a silence, and then the words that broke my heart. Well, that was 3 years ago, Elena. Can't you just move past it for your sister's sake? I hung up on her. The next text came from Sophie herself. I can't believe you're trying to ruin my wedding over some supposed incident from years ago. Supposed incident? That was the final straw. The peacekeeper inside me died, and in her place, a warrior was born. I knew then that I couldn't go. I couldn't stand by and validate her choice to prioritize a predator over her own sister. 3 weeks before the wedding, I made one last, desperate attempt at reconciliation. I asked Sophie to meet for coffee. To my surprise, she agreed. She looked exhausted, the stress of wedding planning etched into the dark circles under her eyes. I need you to understand what Adrian did. I began, but she cut me off. Stop. I don't want to hear another word about ancient history. It's not ancient history when you are forcing me to link arms with him. My voice rose, and heads turned in the quiet cafe. You are making me choose between my sister and my future family, she hissed. No, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't known I possessed. You are choosing between your sister's safety and your fiancé's creepy brother. He assaulted me, Sophie. And you are choosing to believe his lies over your own blood. She stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. I'm done with this. You can either be my bridesmaid and walk in the processional I have planned, or you can stay home. But stop trying to manipulate me with your victim complex. Victim complex. She left me there, her cruel words hanging in the air like poison. That night, I called Luca. I'm not going, I told him. My voice was steady, calm. The decision, once made, brought a strange sense of peace. The only thing I would regret is walking down that aisle with him while you were sitting at home. My father called, making his first real intervention. I know this isn't ideal, Elena, he'd said, his voice heavy. But sometimes we have to make sacrifices for family. Adrian sexually assaulted me, Dad. That's not a sacrifice. That's asking me to condone abuse. That's a very serious accusation, he'd said cautiously. It's not an accusation. It's what happened. I didn't misunderstand him pressing me against a wall. I didn't misunderstand having to physically shove him off me and lock myself in a stall until he left. The confession tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Well, why didn't you tell us all this sooner? He finally asked. The question was so absurd, so willfully ignorant, that all I could do was laugh. I hung up on my father, my hands shaking. My cousin Isabel, the only one who had reached out to ask for my side of the story, was horrified when I told her everything. I'm not going to the wedding either, she declared, her voice firm. I have a daughter, Elena. How can I go to a wedding that celebrates silencing a victim of assault? What kind of message would that send her? Sophie's fiancé, Liam, began leaving threatening messages for my brother Julian. His brother Adrian sent an email after I wrote Sophie one last, heartfelt letter, trying to make her understand. The email was from Adrian, not Sophie. Your sister showed me your manipulative letter, it read. It's clear you're mentally unstable. You are no longer welcome at our wedding or in our lives. Any further contact will be considered harassment. Sophie hadn't just chosen them. She had been absorbed by them. She was no longer my sister. She was one of them. The morning of the wedding was gray and drizzling, a perfect reflection of my mood. Julian and Nico stopped by on their way to the venue, looking handsome but miserable in their tuxedos. We feel like traitors, Nico mumbled. You're not, I assured them. You're brothers, trying to support both your sisters in an impossible situation. After they left, the apartment felt cavernously quiet. As the ceremony time approached, I finally broke down, grieving not just for the wedding, but for the sister I had lost. She chose the illusion of a perfect wedding over the reality of who she was marrying into, Luca said, holding me tight. And someday, she'll have to face that reality. Someday arrived sooner than any of us could have imagined. At 3:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was Julian, his voice strained and barely audible over a cacophony of background noise. Elena, something's happened. Adrian cornered one of the servers during the cocktail hour. In the hallway by the kitchen. Liam's cousins saw the whole thing. The girl is only 20. The catering manager is threatening to pull his entire staff. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Where's Sophie? In the bridal suite, getting her makeup touched up. She doesn't know yet. Liam is trying to pay the catering manager to stay quiet. I heard shouting in the background. I have to go, Julian said, his voice tight. The photographer just quit. Apparently, Adrian made some lewd comments to her when she was setting up. The call went dead. 20 minutes later, Nico called. You're not going to believe this. Isabel just blew the whole thing up. She came for the ceremony, heard what happened with the server, and during Liam's father's toast, she stood up and announced, in front of everyone, exactly what Adrian had done. Oh my God. It's chaos, Elena. Liam's mother is screaming at Isabel. Dad's trying to play mediator. Mom is just sobbing. And Sophie slapped Isabel right across the face. Then she grabbed the microphone and shrieked that anyone who believed Isabel's lies could leave. My phone beeped with another incoming call.
It was Julian again.
It's getting worse. 3 of Liam's fraternity brothers just confronted Adrian. Turns out they knew about his reputation from college. One of them has been waiting years to publicly call him out. There was a crash. Adrian just shoved one of them into the gift table. Nico's trying to break it up. I have to go help. The rest of the afternoon was a surreal haze of fragmented updates from my brothers and Isabel. The wedding didn't just end. It imploded in spectacular fashion. The catering staff walked out. The DJ packed up his equipment. Guests fled as if escaping a burning building. Adrian, in a drunken rage, had tried to follow the terrified server to her car. My father called later, his voice hollow. The wedding's over. The venue kicked everyone out.
Elena.
I owe you an apology.
You were right.
You were right about everything. That night, I got a call from the server, a young woman named Emily. Isabel had given her my number. Her voice was shaking. Isabel told me what happened to you. It had helped, knowing I wasn't alone. My heart ached for her. My manager wants me to file a police report, but I'm scared. Liam's family is already threatening to sue the company for defamation. That's witness intimidation, Lucas said from beside me. That's illegal. Would you come with me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. To file the report? I know we don't know each other, but Isabel said you'd understand. Of course, I said without hesitation. We'll be there. The next morning, we met Emily at the police station. More people came forward. The photographer, other guests, even 3 women from Adrian's college, finally emboldened to speak out. The dam of silence had broken, and the truth came flooding out. Sophie called me a week later, her voice raw with tears. Are you happy now? My wedding is ruined. My reputation is destroyed. She was still blaming me, still defending him. That server was flirting with him, she'd sobbed. Sophie, please stop. I'd said, my voice weary. You know the truth. You've always known. It was the last time we spoke for months. For months later, Sophie left Liam. She showed up on our parents' doorstep with 2 suitcases and a shattered heart. My mother called me, her voice breaking. Sophie had found messages on Liam's phone. He had been covering for Adrian for years, paying off women, threatening anyone who tried to speak out. She found receipts. And then she found the photos. Photos Adrian had taken of women without their consent, including one of me from their engagement party. Liam had been keeping it as insurance, a piece of leverage in case I ever went public. But the final, devastating blow was a series of messages between the brothers from the night of my confrontation with Sophie. Adrian was bragging about how he'd finally get his hands on me during the processional. Liam was encouraging him, laughing about it. A week later, I received a letter. Elena, it began. I don't know where to start. I'm sorry doesn't feel like enough, but it's the truth. I knew. I knew when you told me about the restroom. I knew every time I saw him watching you. I chose a fairy tale over my sister. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I know now. I'm getting divorced. I'm in therapy. You were right about everything. I'm so sorry I didn't listen.
Sophie.
I read the letter 3 times, and then I cried. Not for her, not for me, but for the wreckage of what we once were. Adrian eventually pleaded guilty to lesser charges, receiving probation and mandatory counseling. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Sophie divorced Liam, using the evidence she'd found to ensure he didn't get a dime. I didn't see her or speak to her for over a year. Then, when Luca and I got engaged, I stared at her name on the invitation list for a long time. In the end, I couldn't do it. The wound was still too deep. We got married 6 months later, a small, beautiful ceremony in my parents' backyard. My brothers stood with us. My parents cried happy tears. Sophie wasn't there, but she sent a card. I wish you all the happiness I almost stole from you, it said. May your marriage be built on truth, not fairy tales. With love and regret, Sophie. I kept the card, but I never replied. Some bridges, once burned to the ground, can't be rebuilt. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the lesson wasn't about forgiveness. It was about learning that your own safety, your own truth, is not a sacrifice you should ever have to make. Not for anyone.